Hello, everybody. Welcome along to today's episode of the Event Industry News Podcast. My name is James Dixon, wishing you all a very good morning, afternoon, or evening, whenever or wherever you are tuning into today's podcast from. And on today's podcast, we welcome founder of Fleek Marketing, Johnny Ross. Johnny, thanks very much for joining the podcast today.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Not a problem at all. We're going to be talking on today's show about Google, about event websites, about SEO, all of those sort of things that are interconnected with event websites. And it's an interesting subject matter, and it's not one that we've addressed directly on the podcast before. The vast majority of events will have a dedicated website for their event. And many event organizers now choose to go down the route of using third parties to expand the profile of their events. Event listing sites, particularly in the live music industry, are very common. But we're keen to tap into some of the expertise that Johnny possesses to find out a little bit more about how you can actually climb the Google ladder with your own website specifically. Johnny, as I said, thanks very much for joining us today. First of all, give us a bit of a background about your agency, Fleek Marketing, and what it is that you guys do there.
Yeah, sure. So we, our passion and we're deeply rooted in search engine optimization. That's where we've come from. We now offer lots of training and consultancy and digital campaigns, but as I said, deep rooted with SEO. So yeah, I had a sunglass website many years ago, which was at the top of Google for pretty much everything, and suffered a Google penalty. And we lost 40% of our turnover over an 18-month period. Spent a fortune on SEO and got absolutely nowhere. Spent tens of thousands of pounds trying to get back to page one. We were bigger than Shade Station and Debenhams at the time. It was amazing. But we were still on page 7 18 months later. In the end, I found a guy in New York who was on $250 an hour. And within 2 weeks, he got us back to page one. I learned a massive amount, became really passionate about SEO and really frustrated with the SEO industry. So yeah, that's the background.
And I suppose, without dumbing it down too much, I think it's important that we actually give people a bit of an insight as to what we're actually talking about when we talk about search engine optimization and SEO. I would imagine that the vast majority of people, if not all of the people listening and tuning into today's podcast, will have heard the term and will be vaguely familiar with it. But would it be fair to say that whilst a lot of people are vaguely familiar with it, they don't fundamentally understand exactly what it is it can be done? And this is why sometimes agencies and SEO experts, quote unquote, can sometimes be sort of frowned upon.
Absolutely, and I think they often are frowned upon. So we're talking about optimizing a website or a platform or a page. It could even be a LinkedIn company profile, but optimizing something to appear higher in a search engine. And again, that could be a LinkedIn search, or it could be a Google search. So and there's loads of different techniques. There's loads of different opinions as well, and that's half the problem. And it's playing a game. We're playing a game with Google. Google has a set of guidelines, but they're not always black and white, and it's about really trying to understand them and trying to understand what's right and what's wrong and what techniques work. But there's some real fundamentals to SEO, and for me, the biggest thing I learned was it's about common sense, and it's about really understanding what Google is as an organization and a company and what they're trying to achieve, and making sure that, if you can deliver the sort of websites that they're trying to serve to their users, which is just you and me and everyone else. We're looking for fast websites. We're looking for websites that give us relevant information, that give us what we're looking for, that give us a good user experience. If we use some common sense, apply that, then actually playing the game is quite easy.
Sure. And as I said, people will have been familiar with the term SEO, undoubtedly. And in a similar way, they'll have been familiar with the term keywords, the keywords that people may use when they're going onto Google to search for a particular item or website or service or organization. But then where the understanding, again, may become clouded a little bit is how those keywords can actually be affected positively within your own website, within that framework. And I suppose that comes to the fundamental of what we're talking about today, doesn't it, with event websites. Event websites will contain, as far as their owners are concerned, loads of critical information, loads of really important information about that particular event, but may not necessarily address the issue of SEO.
Yeah. So keywords is a huge aspect of search engine optimization. It's about really understanding, going back to, who are you trying to engage with? Who's your target audience? Really getting into the mindsets of those different people, because there will be different groups of target audiences that you're trying to engage with, and trying to understand from their point of view what they might be searching. But also intent plays a massive factor now as well. So not only have you got to work out what they might be searching, but also really understanding the time of day and the device that they're on. So, for example, someone searching for something, in the evening on a mobile phone compared to daytime on a desktop could have very different intent.
Sure.
Be using this keyword. So it's so it's really understanding how people search, what people type, really getting to grips with the different audiences, but also thinking about and how voice search is playing a bigger part, and the way we talk to devices and use devices to search things. We talk in a different way as well. So that's something else that needs to be thought about. So, for example, typically I'd ask a question. If I was going to be doing some kind of voice search talking to a device, I'm less likely to type a short phrase in. I'm more likely to, I'm not going to type at all, I'm going to speak, but less likely to speak a short phrase, but more likely to ask a question. So I always remember when voice search, really the sort of light bulb moment on how big voice search is becoming was when my one of my kids, when they were, I think they were 11 at the time, they were doing some home with a picture of a red lobster, and I distinctly remember him pressing Siri on his phone and saying, show me images of red lobsters. I'd have just typed red lobsters into Google and be presented with a picture of a red lobster. So it was that sort of light bulb moment that voice search is becoming bigger here, but also the way people are using it is different. So yeah, it's really getting under the skin of how people talk, but also what people type and what their issues are, what their pain points are, all the different ways of, you might have a load of jargon in your industry, but it's about really understanding how what users words they'd be using.
And it's a fascinating point that you raise straight away there about the difference between written language and the spoken word, because as you rightly point out, we're seeing more and more voice-activated devices creeping in, not just to our lives at home, but in business as well. That's creeping in, and perhaps unknowingly, this is all having an effect on SEO and what people need to be aware of and how they are developing the optimization of their websites. Is it suitable for spoken content and spoken searches that have been activated by a user?
Yeah, so the big thing that voice has opened up is what we call position zero, and that's that content at the top of Google that is actually higher than position one. So it's the sort of content that you ask a question to Google and you see that answer at the top, and then below you've got other people have also asked these questions, and then you start seeing some of the organic results. Sure. So position zero typically is either a paragraph or a set of bullet points. It could be if you're looking for a particular recipe or how to apply lipstick, that sort of search is going to trigger a position zero result, and you can also get to paragraphs, bullet points, but also tables. Now that content is coming specifically from websites that really understand how to give content to Google on a plate. Mm-hmm. And by that I mean they're using code in their content that says to Google, look, if someone asks this question, this is the answer, instead of just having that question on a web page with an answer and Google having to figure out that actually that's what's going on here. So at this point, we start talking about things like rich snippets, and we talk about microdata, schema, RDFs. It's all sort of similar stuff, and it's just a bit of code that's used to wrap around content to say to Google, look, this is a question, this is the phrase of the question, and here's the answer that goes with that question. And that's probably the biggest difference that voice has brought along. And if you can win at position 0, then there's some serious clicks to be got, and some branding to be got, and currently it's not monetized either, so there's an opportunity there.
Sure. One thing that I was keen to ask you on today's episode, knowing what the subject matter would be, was some of the sort of most sort of simple day-to-day tips, tricks, tools, methods that event organizers can use, because there will be a lot of small to medium-sized event organizers out there who are responsible for all of the operational aspects of their events, including some of the basic maintenance of their own event website. They will be utilizing modern tools and simpler web design methods now to be able to actually manage content themselves. And when we talk about uploading videos and pictures now, it's so easy to do. I'm curious to ask whether or not the ease of being able to do that now has actually taken away some of people's understanding about how important it is to make sure that files are labeled correctly or tagged correctly when they're going on there. Is that something that you think has sort of dropped off the radar a little bit because of how easy it is now to manage websites?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. You can end up getting lost in some of the technical detail, and there are some pretty basics to be had. And with a lot of the content management systems, a lot of the technical stuff is covered. But it is about, it is about still thinking about labeling images as not just 123.jpg, but a descriptive file name. I think the biggest opportunity in it, if we were to go to real practical tips that small to medium event organizers could be using on their websites quite quickly, is actually thinking about SEO at every stage. So have at the back of your mind all the time. Looking at the flow of an event, all the stuff that happens during prior to the event, then during the event, and then post event. But thinking about how you can use speakers at the event, how you can use delegates, how you can use exhibitors, and for them all to play a part in search engine optimization. So just, as a quick example, if you can come up with a strategy of getting exhibitors to link to your website and you can show them value as to why they're doing that, then wow, that ticks a massive SEO box. You've suddenly generated a load of links from 100 exhibitors potentially. Likewise, if you can get delegates to be sharing your website URL for some reason by adding some value in there, then things like that, and also giving really good reasons and good value for people to be coming to the website prior, to be coming to the website during, and to be coming to the website afterwards, and generating traffic around these moments. So a lot of focus is on the event itself, of course, and driving numbers. But a lot of things are missed along the way, where there could be little small opportunities that can make big differences, especially when you've got a decent set of numbers as well. So another example would be if you do have speakers at an event, asking them to do some short video content prior to the event that you can not just use on social, but you can then embed in your own website. It adds that. Not everyone wants to just read text. It adds a bit more content that makes it a bit more flavorful, and so it's just little things. But putting a process in place to make sure that could we get all speakers to do that? Could we get all delegates to do this, etc., etc.
And I guess that's certainly where companies like your own come into their own, isn't it? Because what you're explaining to people in a fundamental sense, it can often be quite straightforward, but it's having the expertise of being able to say to people, these are some of the things that you just need to pay attention to. I'm sure that once you give that advice to people, and no doubt you've spoken to clients where you can almost see the light bulb moment where they get it and they understand what you're saying to them, that actually, I can actually do a lot of this myself, but coming to you, it is for the guidance and the direction that I need in order to be able to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It is, and it is about those bits of detail. I mean, you could call it growth hacking if you wanted to, which is a marketing term that not many people thoroughly understand. But actually, it's just tiny little tweaks that can make massive differences.
Sure.
And it's about having stuff in mind so that you can do a small tweak here. It's a bit like the pennies and the pounds add up, and the a little a bit on the margin can make a big difference on the profit. That sort of difference, really.
Absolutely. I'm curious to ask about the social media aspect of things, because again, many event organizers will have a marketing strategy that involves a social media strategy, and they will have a social media plan and a schedule of what they want to put out there, and they will have probably a lot of effort that goes into planning what they're going to deliver via their different feeds, whether that be Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, whatever they're choosing. And that will often be totally separate to any sort of schedule of website activity. And similarly, they may not have a schedule of activity for their website. They will just put stuff on as and when they think they need to put it on there. How important is what they're doing on social media playing a part in what they could do to actually improve their rankings on Google with their actual website?
Yeah, it's probably about having an integrated approach, and it's about thinking about the way I see it is that content marketing plays a huge part in search engine optimization. So you'd have maybe a blog or a video or an image, some piece of content as the sort of center of the campaign. And then you'd use social to signpost people to that piece of content. So that would then, in effect, also be ticking a massive SEO box as well. So you'd have, some kind of thought piece or some kind of how-to guide on the website itself, full of nice, rich keywords and questions and answers that people might be asking. But then you'd use social to promote that. You might even use some paid social to promote some of that, but you might use social to trigger conversation around it and to signpost people to it, and all being this generates more traffic and search engine optimization. And the other thing that a lot of people miss, to be fair, a lot of events don't miss it, but at the same time a lot do, is actually adding the event as a Facebook event. So you've got an event running. Has anyone thought of actually adding it on Facebook as an event on there, and using that to drive traffic and numbers as well? I totally get there'll be certain events that are sort of thinking, well, yeah, that's pretty obvious. But actually, there'll be a lot of B2B events or a lot of events that aren't sort of very with savvy audiences or that just haven't considered, we could actually add it as a Facebook event, and something as simple can make a massive difference.
Well, you're right to point it out, because there will be B2B events out there that whose marketing teams or whose organisers themselves will say, "Oh no, Facebook, that Facebook is a B2C platform. It has no place for our event. We're a big pharmaceutical convention," or whatever it may be. Who will, like you say, just say dismiss it completely. I suppose the obvious question, and it's a straightforward yes or no, does having an event listing on Facebook, does Google read event listings? Will it see how many people have interacted with that Facebook event listing, see how many people have accepted it or said that they're interested, and does it pick up on that via Google?
Well, I'm not sure the answer is yes or no. I think it's a grayer area, and I think the short answer is Google doesn't necessarily see that data.
Right.
But what Google does see is if you've got if Facebook drives people to that event and then people start clicking through to your website, then Google then does see that data of people then of new traffic coming to your website. So I think it absolutely plays a part, but I don't think it's as simple as Google seeing how many people are going and how far it's reaching on Facebook.
Sure. When it comes to the actual subject of working with events and event websites themselves, as I said at the very beginning of today's episode, this was one that I was very keen to look at and look at in a bit more detail. And personally, I think it's something that we can look at in more detail further down the line as well. This to me is not just a one-off episode, because it's a subject that we haven't tackled on the podcast before. Have you had experience where events have come to you and said, look, we're just not getting, the traffic that we want to the website. We're struggling to market the event. We're struggling to get uptake on it. What's your own sort of personal interaction been with events? Or is it something that as an outsider you've looked at and thought, actually, they could be doing things a lot better?
Well, yeah. The answer to that is yes. There's been lots of opportunities where I've worked with event organisers where they've struggled with numbers, or they're wanting to put some increases in, and maybe they're doing very well, but actually they're wanting to increase by 20% next year, and it is working with them to put some kind of strategy together to build the numbers, not just through social, not just through face to face, but also through organic and SEO. So it's just about putting strategies together and making sure that all these things are thought about. Sometimes there's some really obvious things. Other times it's about digging into things like Google Analytics and understanding user journey and understanding drop-off points, understanding, again, going back to keywords and thinking, well, actually, there's some real missed opportunities here. A lot of jargon's being used, but we've not thought about this particular audience who actually might talk about it in a very different way. And so that can have some big effects. And I think one of the biggest things that I see across the industry with events is that the post event is really weak. So the lead up is massive. There's a bit during the event, but actually the post, it just drops off really quickly. And what there isn't in there is some kind of strategy to get delegates, speakers, exhibitors back onto that website following the event, and that could be about as simple as having video from video content from the event itself. I mean, I could go into a whole nother, as you said, I could go into a whole nother podcast on the actual content itself. But the key thing is, what's your strategy on getting people back to that website after the event? Because that can drive some real SEO for the next event you're running, and that's probably where some of the biggest opportunities are.
How often are you asked by your own customers and clients about Google Analytics, and perhaps presented with the opinion from them that it's just a minefield? Because I've had some experience of looking at Google Analytics, and it strikes me as something that offers a fabulous level of detail and depth into the traffic and how a website is performing. But at its most basic level, could be quite off-putting for people who have not got that detailed level of experience in analysing it. Is there a way to use analytics and just access it and still be able to just draw some basic data that's usable on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, I think the key thing with Google Analytics, and I do lots of training with Google Analytics, is actually, before you even step into Google Analytics, really defining what it is you're trying to achieve, what are your business goals, what are your marketing goals. It sounds, pretty standard stuff, this, but actually so many people don't have that. And it's about having smart objectives. What exactly are you trying to achieve? Right now we know that. Let's go into Google Analytics and have a look at specifically something around what you're trying to achieve, and see if specifically there's an issue or there's something that can be made better. And then the flip side to that is, most people that look at Google Analytics, certainly in small to medium businesses that aren't overly savvy, don't have goal and event tracking set up. And when I say event, I don't mean the event industry stuff. I mean sure. Google Analytics event. There's goal and tracking within Google Analytics, which basically makes it very clear to Google Analytics what it is you're wanting users to do on your website. Now, without that in place, all the data in there is totally meaningless. And I would say, I look at least, a minimum of 5, probably 10 different websites of Google Analytics a week. I would say only 30% of them let's say 50% of them have goals set up in the first place, and out of that, only 30% of them actually have the right goals set up. So all that data they're looking at is completely meaningless because they've not made it clear to Google Analytics what it is they're trying to get users to actually do in the first place. So those are the basics that need doing before you then start playing with the data.
And in some respects, it strikes me that people have actually gone beyond why they set up websites in the first place. Because before we had social media, before we had Facebook, we had websites. We had the basic internet in its infancy. And then people suddenly realized, actually, we need a presence on the web. We need a website. That's going to be then our primary marketing tool. People put all this effort into creating websites. And they've almost, in some ways, they've almost been forgotten because people now look at social media platforms and think, right, well, that's where all my communication focus and strategy and money needs to be spent and all my investment needs to be there. And the website has almost become something that just sits there and presents itself a little bit, and people are no longer using it as a really sort of viable part of their marketing strategy anymore, where it really could be if they invested just a little bit back into there.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. Absolutely agree.
Yeah, I say it all the time. Yeah, I've had experience of it. I've seen it myself. It just seems to be this sort of massive shift where we had it for a period of time, and then we've almost sort of skipped beyond it, and it's still there. It's still something that people say, "Oh, yeah, I know I've got to have it," but it just sits there, and this is now where I spend all my money and my effort. And perhaps there's a little bit of re-education and refocusing that needs to be done in order to sort of bring people back to what they could achieve.
Yeah, and what's the purpose? Absolutely.
Yeah, indeed. We've been speaking on today's podcast to Johnny Ross. Johnny is the founder of a company called Fleek Marketing. And I should have asked you at the top of the episode, Johnny, whereabouts you guys are based and where you're joining us from today.
In Leeds in Yorkshire.
Leeds in Yorkshire, in England for our international podcast followers. Johnny, tell us if any of our podcast followers want to get in touch with you, maybe ask their own questions directly to you and find out a little bit more about what you guys do. How do they get in touch with you?
On Twitter at Johnny Ross, no H, Johnny Ross, and the same for LinkedIn / Johnny Ross.
Fantastic. And Google Fleek Marketing. I'm certain that you'll find them fairly quickly.
Absolutely.
Johnny, thanks very much for joining the podcast today. If you are watching the video version of this podcast, hop over to your favorite podcast platform. You can download all of the previous episodes of the podcast, listen to them to and from your commute to work or wherever you're out and about and you've got your headphones on you. And alternatively, if you're listening to today's podcast, there are video versions of the podcast over on eventindustrynews.com. And whilst you're there, don't forget to check out all of the latest news and special features that have been put up onto the Event Industry News website. For the time being, our thanks once again to Johnny Ross from Fleek Marketing for joining us on the podcast today. My name is James Dixon, and we will see you on the next episode. Thanks very much and goodbye.